Did you know that Cain and Abel had twin sisters who were completely left out of the Bible? If you've looked up and down in the Bible thinking, wait a second, I don't see anything about Cain and Abel having sisters, you're absolutely correct. The Bible doesn't directly mention sisters by name, just like it never directly names Cain's wife or Seth's wife. But here's the thing. We know they had wives, and logically, those wives had to come from somewhere. So who were these sisters, born alongside Cain and Abel, who seem to have been completely forgotten in the biblical text? Let's talk about the eldest sister, Luluwa, the first forgotten daughter of Adam and Eve. Her story, tucked away in the Book of Adam and Eve, is fascinating and deeply intertwined with the early struggles of humanity. Ready? Let's dive in. Part 2. The story of Luluwa. When Eve gave birth to her first children, she brought forth not only a son, Cain, but also a daughter, Luluwa. According to the Book of Adam and Eve, Adam was overjoyed, celebrating both Eve's safe delivery and the birth of their children. Now, here's something interesting. Luluwa's name translates to beautiful. The text tells us she was so stunning that she was even described as being more beautiful than her mother. Can you imagine that? She was likely the first symbol of beauty in the world. Because of Luluwa's beauty, she became entangled in a lot of family drama. As was customary at the time, Adam and Eve decided to arrange marriages for their children. The plan was for Cain to marry Abel's twin sister, Aklea, and for Abel to marry Luluwa. But here's where the cracks began to form. Cain wasn't happy about this decision. He was deeply jealous, feeling that his parents loved Abel more, and he resented the idea of being paired with Aklea, who the text describes as ill-favored, while Abel was set to marry the stunning Luluwa. You can almost hear Cain's inner voice saying, "Why does Abel get everything, including the beautiful sister?" This jealousy simmered and eventually played a huge role in what happened next. Part 3. The conflict fueled by Luluwa's beauty. According to the Book of Adam and Eve, Luluwa's beauty became a source of conflict. Cain's envy toward Abel wasn't just about their parents' favor or the sacrifices to God. It was also tied to Luluwa. Cain wanted Luluwa for himself, and his anger at being denied her led him to commit the ultimate act of betrayal, the murder of Abel. After Cain killed Abel, Luluwa was understandably distraught. The text describes how she wept and ran to her parents to tell them what had happened. Imagine her grief, not only losing a brother, but knowing that she was, in some ways, at the center of this tragic event. Despite everything after Abel's death, Cain took Luluwa as his wife. Cain married Luluwa without Adam and Eve's permission. The Book of Adam and Eve paints a vivid picture of the heavy sorrow Adam and Eve felt, so much so that they couldn't even stop Cain from marrying Luluwa. It was as if their grief over Abel's death left them powerless to intervene. Part 4. Cain and Luluwa's New Beginning. Cain and Luluwa then left the mountain where the family lived, moving to a lower land near the place where Cain had killed Abel. In this new land, they started their own family. Luluwa bore children for Cain, and their descendants began to multiply. This part of Luluwa's story is both tragic and fascinating. She was caught between her brother's jealousy, her family's sorrow, and the need to continue the human race. Part 5. Luluwa becomes Awan in the Book of Jubilees. In the Book of Jubilees, Luluwa is given a new name, Awan. While it might seem like a small change, the name shift is significant. The name Awan in Hebrew can mean vice or iniquity, which casts a different tone over her story. Scholars suggest that this name reflects the shadow of Cain's actions, the murder of his brother, and the curse he carried. Despite these associations, Awan's story isn't one of condemnation. Instead, it's one of resilience and continuity. Part 6. Awan's role as Cain's partner. When Cain was banished after killing Abel, Awan went with him. Together they began to build a life far from Adam and Eve. According to the Book of Jubilees, Awan bore children with Cain, and their descendants spread across the earth. Interestingly, Cain is credited with building a city and naming it Enoch after his son. Although the text doesn't explicitly detail Awan's role in this legacy, her presence as Cain's wife and the mother of his descendants is undeniable. Without Awan, Cain's story might have ended in isolation and despair. Instead, she became part of the narrative of humanity's growth and expansion. Part 7. Comparing perspectives from two texts. The shift from Luluwa in the Book of Adam and Eve to Awan in the Book of Jubilees is a reminder of how different traditions and texts interpret the same figure. In the Book of Adam and Eve, Luluwa is remembered for her beauty, which became a catalyst for conflict within the family. In the Book of Jubilees, Awan's story focuses on resilience and her role as Cain's wife, helping to continue humanity's lineage. Together, these perspectives give us a more complete picture of her life and legacy. Part 8. Aklea, the second daughter of Adam and Eve. Let's turn our attention to Aklea, the second daughter of Adam and Eve, as mentioned in the Book of Adam and Eve. While her story is often overshadowed by her siblings, it provides another fascinating glimpse into the early days of humanity. The name Aklea isn't given much symbolic explanation in the text, but her role in the family dynamic is unmistakable. While Luluwa was noted for her extraordinary beauty, Aklea is often described in contrast, seen as less favored in appearance. Aklea's birth came after Eve conceived again, following the weaning of her first children, Cain and Luluwa. Unlike Luluwa, who was described as exceptionally beautiful, Aklea is presented without such praise. However, her story doesn't focus on her physical appearance. Instead, it highlights her role within the family dynamics and the unfolding events in Adam and Eve's lineage. Part 9. Aklea's role in the conflict between Cain and Abel. When Abel was born, his name reflected his nature as a beloved and righteous child. Alongside him was Aklea, his twin sister. In line with the customs of the time, siblings were often paired in marriage to ensure the continuation of humanity. Adam and Eve decided that Aklea would eventually marry Cain, while Abel would marry Luluwa. This decision, however, would become a source of tension and tragedy within the family. The Book of Adam and Eve subtly weaves Aklea into the background of the infamous conflict between Cain and Abel. Although the primary focus of the narrative remains on the brothers, Aklea plays a crucial role as the sister Cain was unwillingly paired with. Part 10. Cain's jealousy and resentment. Towards Aklea, Adam and Eve saw Abel as the favored son, and their preference extended to their desire to pair him with Luluwa, the more beautiful sister. Meanwhile, Cain was to marry Aklea, who, in contrast to Luluwa, is described as ill-favored in Cain's eyes. This arrangement deeply angered Cain. It fueled his jealousy and hatred, not only toward his brother, but also toward the circumstances he believed were unfairly thrust upon him. The text implies that Cain's resentment was exacerbated by the pairing, which he saw as a reflection of his parents' favoritism toward Abel. Part 11. Aklea's role in the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees doesn't just rename her, it reframes her story. While Aklea's story in the Book of Adam and Eve is rooted in personal struggles, the Book of Jubilees highlights her significance within the larger narrative of humanity's growth and survival. In the Book of Jubilees, Aklea's name is changed to Azura, and she is specifically identified as the wife of Seth, Adam and Eve's third son. This union was vital to the continuation of humanity's righteous line, especially after the tragic loss of Abel and the exile of Cain. Part 12. Azura's role in the renewal of humanity. Azura's marriage to Seth is described as a sacred bond that helped re-establish stability and hope for humanity's future. Here's what the Book of Jubilees tells us about her. Azura was born after Cain and Abel. After the tragic events involving Cain and Abel, Seth steps into the role of the righteous son. Azura becomes his wife, solidifying the next step in humanity's divine plan. Their union is blessed, and they give birth to a son named Enosh, who carries forward the tradition of worshiping God. This marks a pivotal moment in the narrative, as Enosh is seen as the patriarch of a line devoted to righteousness. Azura's marriage to Seth symbolizes renewal after the chaos brought on by Cain's actions. Together, they lay the foundation for a lineage that leads to Noah and ultimately to the Messiah. Part 13, comparing Aklea with Luluwa. While Aklea and Azura may seem like two different people at first glance, their stories align perfectly when you place them side by side. Azura, as described in the Book of Jubilees, highlights her role as Seth's partner in rebuilding humanity's spiritual path. Aklea, in the Book of Adam and Eve, plays a more intimate role in the family's struggles and dynamics. Together, these texts give us a fuller understanding of her life, showing us that Azura, or Aklea, is more than just a forgotten daughter of Adam and Eve. She is a symbol of hope, restoration, and divine purpose during a time when humanity was just beginning to find its footing. Part 14. Seth, the replacement for Abel. Here's where things get interesting. After Abel's death, Adam and Eve had another son, Seth. He was seen as a divine gift, a replacement for Abel, and it was through Seth's lineage that humanity's righteous line would continue. The Book of Adam and Eve doesn't explicitly say this, but ancient traditions suggest that Azura, formerly known as Aklea, may have later married Seth, continuing the family's lineage and fulfilling her role in God's plan. Think about it. Seth was born into a family that had already experienced deep loss. Azura would have shared in that loss, and together they might have brought a sense of hope and renewal to Adam and Eve, becoming the foundation for a new chapter in humanity's story. Part 15. The significance of Seth's lineage. If Azura did indeed marry Seth, her life became part of the genealogy that eventually led to Noah, Abraham, and even Jesus Christ. The continuation of the righteous line was essential for the fulfillment of God's plan, and Azura's role in this process was crucial, even though her story wasn't always fully highlighted in the canonical texts. Seth's lineage is one of divine purpose. As the righteous son who carried on the faithful worship of God, Seth's descendants played a pivotal role in the preservation of humanity and the eventual salvation of the world. Part 16. The absence of daughters in the Bible. So, here's the million-dollar question. Why doesn't the Bible talk about Adam and Eve's daughters, like Luluwa, Aklea, Azura, or others? If they played such significant roles in the survival and growth of humanity, why are their names and stories missing from the biblical text? For example, Genesis 5:4 says, "After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters." That's it. No names, no details, just a mention that Adam and Eve had other children. The focus shifts to Seth because he is the one who carries the lineage leading to Noah and eventually to Jesus. Part 17. The treatment of women in ancient texts. The daughters, while crucial to humanity's survival, weren't considered central to the narrative. In ancient texts, women were often omitted from genealogies and historical accounts, unless their roles were extraordinary or directly tied to the storyline. Think about women like Sarah, Ruth, or Mary. They're mentioned because their actions were pivotal to God's plan. But Adam and Eve's daughters, while essential for populating the earth, didn't have stories in the Bible that were seen as central to the overarching narrative. Part 18. The Book of Adam and Eve and the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Adam and Eve and the Book of Jubilees come from traditions that aim to fill in the gaps left by the canonical texts. They provide names, relationships, and even some personal struggles that were left out of the Bible. Let's not forget that these texts were written for different purposes than the canonical Bible. They aim to expand on the stories found in Genesis, providing cultural and narrative details that were left out of the Bible. While they aren't considered canonical by most traditions, they offer valuable insights into how ancient communities understood these stories and sought to preserve them. Part 19. A deeper understanding of God's plan. When we explore texts like the Book of Adam and Eve or the Book of Jubilees, we're not just uncovering forgotten stories, we're gaining a deeper appreciation for the intricate and interconnected nature of God's plan. Whether they are called Aklea, Azura, Luluwa, or something else, these daughters remind us of the vital, often unseen roles that shape history. Their lives may not have been fully detailed in the canonical Bible, but they played significant parts in humanity's survival and the unfolding of God's plan for the world. If this story sparked your curiosity, there's so much more to uncover. The untold stories of the Bible, including those of Adam and Eve's daughters, invite us to dive deeper into the mysteries of human history and our divine purpose. Let's keep exploring the stories that were once hidden, as they offer profound insights into how God's plan unfolded through every generation.